Thank you. Good afternoon. We know that protests for peace and justice have continued this week in our state and across the nation. I have been heartened by national and local reports that there seems to have been both continued protests peaceably and a reduction of some of the violence that unfortunately has intruded into some of these otherwise peaceful protests. And I just want to say it appears to me there's been a strong effort by the leaders of these protests to try to prevent people from hijacking their peaceful protests. And it appears to me that those things are working. That's leadership that helps us both bring this very strong cry for justice in our country and our state, at the same time not allowing people being violent to hijack that central message. And I believe we will be successful not allowing any violence to hijack the central need for us to bring more justice to our community. Today we saw in the news that a Pierce County Sheriff's Office is investigating the death of a black man, Manny Ellis, in Tacoma under police restraint that occasioned in March. My understanding is that Mayor Woodwards will be addressing that later in her own press conference this afternoon. I know finding out the full circumstances of that event is a top priority for her, and it is a top priority for me. And we will be pushing to make sure there is a full and complete investigation of that incident. We know that we have to continue to push for de-escalation interactions between law enforcement and our community members. So I look forward to the mayor's press conference. Last night, there emerged a video of a member of our state patrol instructing officers on how to respond to what was a tense and potentially dangerous situation. And the language that he used was not in keeping with what we expect of our state patrol officers. The state patrol very promptly took responsibility and apologized for that misuse of language. We know that officers in positions of leadership, they're looked up to by their subordinates, which makes their choice of words very important in these tense situations. In responding to this duress, that is always important and now more important than ever. I've asked Chief Batiste to fully review that situation and make any appropriate response that is necessary. Look, I think we all understand that officers in these situations do have really tough jobs. They have bottles being thrown at them. Chief Batiste told me that people are now shining laser beams in our officers' eyes, trying to injure their eyesight. So we know it's a real tough job. But look, we have to have high levels of standard for our state patrol, and I know they want to conform to those high levels of standards, and that's what we expect. We know that we have a moment of potential positive change in our state, in our nation, as we grapple with centuries of racial inequity. And we know that the path to change from those ancient inequities first includes a mutual understanding of why we need change as much as a discussion of how we need to go about that change. I think it said some of us need to get into the water before we swim, and we need to do it sooner rather than later, myself included. And many of us have had lifelong learning process about the injurious nature of racism, myself included, and we know that that needs to continue now and for years to come. I came across, I think, a powerful quote. Professor and author Ibram X. Kendi, he wrote that racist ideas love believers, not thinkers. And it is time for all of our leaders to think more about this and to actually couple thinking about it with action. And I know that I think it's important in thinking about our challenges right now that these challenges are not just about police reform or not just about judicial reform. In order for us to have a really fair and just society, there is so much more we need to focus on in addition to these matters of law enforcement. We have to have a comprehensive effort towards economic justice that Dr. King spoke of, an effort to provide housing to deal with food insecurity, to have real, truly equal access to education, and truly equal access to health care. If we're going to succeed coming out of these challenges that we face today, precipitated by this police violence, it has got to encourage us to be all-encompassing to deal with the centuries of racial inequality in our state. Now, in that regard, people want to be heard, and that means we need to listen. To that end, I'll be meeting some of the leaders of the peaceful protest movement today. I'll be talking to representatives from Not This Time, from the Black Lives Matter of Seattle-King County, and from the Urban League. Now, I have some other announcements I'd like to talk about. As you know, we've activated some additional members of our National Guard to help us protect people and property in our state. Soldiers who are not currently assigned to our COVID-19 related mission are either available for help or have been directed to receive training so that they can provide safety. I think that is a prudent step. We need to be able to respond quickly to local needs of the local communities. And I think in regard to the Guard, I just want to remind people that the people who are in the Guard are our neighbors. They are co-workers. They're our teachers, and they come from all of our communities. They take off their civilian clothes and jump into their Guard uniform. They're highly trained, and they're really dedicated people. I've seen their work helping our communities just the last few weeks in so many different roles. I've seen them packing boxes of food that get distributed in the food bank, and these people were fast. I mean, they know how to work, I'll tell you that. I've seen them doing contact tracing to help people prevent getting the COVID-19 virus, talking to a group in Tumwater, working the phones, and I was really encouraged. They really like this duty, and they're doing it well, and we're having good success. They told me about 80% of people are actually responding positively to them so we can reduce the transmission rate of virus. They've never done this work before, but they took it on because of their incredible community spirit, and I just want to thank them for all the work they're doing. Their work at the food banks has been exemplary. I'm proud that our Department of Ecology and the 500 food pantry outlets are working together. Last week, I approved the release of another $51 million in CARES Act funding for the Department of Agriculture to purchase more food and food distribution supplies for our food banks and other nonprofits. Since COVID struck, there's been more than a twofold increase in Washington residents that rely on our food banks. About 21% of our citizens visited a food bank in April, up from an average of 12%. Last night, I also issued additional guidance further clarifying requirements for the agricultural industry to keep our people safe. This elaborates on the state's expectations with regard to isolation plans, face coverings, hand washing, and transportation. So I want to thank everyone who's still involved in this effort to care for our citizens and to continue this effort against this terrible virus. Today, my office and the Joint Information Center updated our COVID-19 risk assessment dashboard. It's going to provide a deeper insight into our community situations regarding COVID. And there'll be a briefing later, I think, today to talk about that. I hope people find it useful in our planning. The vast majority of counties are now either in phase 2 or have pending applications to move forward in our Safe Start plan. King has applied for a phase 1 or 1.5, as you will. As of today, there are 8 counties that have been in phase 2 for 3 weeks, which means they now may be considered for phase 3 if they meet the necessary criteria. As you know, that criteria are at least the targets or that have less than 25 cases per 100,000 people over a 14-day period. These counties are Columbia, Ferry, Garfield, Lincoln, Pend Oreille, Skamania, Stevens, and Wahkiakum. Whitman County could be eligible by Friday, we hope. I do want to comment that these metric goals are applied as targets, not absolute hardline measures. Where one target may not be quite achieved, the combination of things that we look at in our metrics may push people over the line to have overall a reduced risk. But I do also want to make this point. We are so far out of the woods, we now have to be increasing our efforts, not decreasing our efforts, increasing our efforts by using new strategies to fight this virus. And that means as we consider these new phase applications, we have to look real carefully to make sure counties have the ability to have adequate testing, to do the contact tracing that we're doing now to help people not get the virus from people they know or love, and to make sure that those families can isolate and that we can help support those families so that they can stay in their homes for 14 days and not infect other people, and that we're using masks, that our community is embracing these things that we really know are the new ways to fight this virus. So we look at those things when we look at the applications, and we're encouraged by some of the things we've seen already. One of my friends who works in our team here went to have her hair done the other day, and she said she was spectacularly impressed by the temperature being taken, by the protocols on masking and gloves and social distancing. People are getting this, and I can't overstate how important that we all be as good as that particular hairdresser. She looks really good too. As of noon today, we have applications from 6 counties to move from phase 1 to phase 2, and 6 more applications from counties to move from phase 2 to phase 3. The Department of Health is working diligently to review these applications. There also has to be an industry-specific phase 3 guidance in place. So I hope that this guidance can be released in the next several days. We take a lot of care and do the best job we can to make sure that we have practical guidance from people. Frankly, that's why it takes some time, because we need to listen to working people and business people in these industries to get it right. With that, I'm happy to stand for questions.
First question comes from Rachel Levesque.
Governor, what is your response to the actions of police in Seattle in recent days? Do you think that they've been proportional to what we've seen at the protests? And what are your thoughts on those who are saying a decade of police reforms haven't worked and who are calling on the city council to cut the Seattle police budget and put the money to social programs instead?
Well, it's a broad question you ask. You know, there have been tens of thousands of interactions between police officers and citizens in the last several days, and each one of them is unique. I guess my reaction to this is I've seen a few things that are troublesome, that need to have answers about these incidents, and I think it's just really important to have a full investigation of each one of those to figure out if something was awry and see if we can learn from them and improve. And the Seattle has a very extensive way to do those investigations, and those need to take place. Mayor Durkin has said they will take place, and I think that's important that they do so. So I would say there's some things need to be looked at. I will also say that I recognize, and I hope many people recognize, that these are very tense, difficult situations that law enforcement works in. When people are trying to protect, you know, the possibility that something be burned down, which has happened in other communities, and they're having a rain of bottles on them or people shining lasers in their eyes. It's a difficult job. I recognize that as well, but we have high expectations, and I think most of the time they have been fulfilled. Again, though, I do want to say this. It's just not the police officers who have been a positive force, and the Guard and the State Patrol in the last few nights. It's been the organizers of these protests that I think have really encouraged people to not allow the violence to mar their peaceful protests, and I want to give them credit for that. You ask about Seattle. You know, I've got enough challenges with the state of Washington without delving into Seattle politics, so I guess I'll defer that particular question.
Next question comes from the Seattle Times.
Governor, on Monday, I believe you had a call with minority business leaders as well as the Black Caucus of the legislature. I'm curious to learn a little bit about what those calls were like, and also in the special session that we're expecting here at some point to deal with the COVID-19 response. Do you see a need or a place for an agenda to address some of these policing issues?
Well, yes, I know we're going to have a robust discussion about any ideas that people have proposed in this regard. The cry for justice is profound and deep. We know we're not at a perfect solution in this regard, so I'm convinced that we will have discussion. And the first part of that is to listen to people about their ideas. And I think that's something we've got to be really powerful listeners on, to the community, to business people, to law enforcement, to fashion things that will actually reduce this rate of violence. So that's the first order of business, and I'm confident that there will be some good ideas to come out of that, as there have in the past. We have improved this situation by some of that. The voters voted for 940 to make sure that there's very independent investigations of these matters. I mentioned the situation in Tacoma. The initiative in 940 that was passed overwhelmingly by Washingtonians require a very robust and independent investigation of these matters. We know that we have had improved training of our officers to de-escalate so that we can put oil on troubled waters rather than gasoline when there's interactions. And that's been held up actually a model across the country for training. But as somebody mentioned in these conversations, that just training can't, scrub, old attitudes of racial thought. And so we have to get to the bottom of that as well. So yes, I do think there will be discussion about those matters, and there will be a place for that. Did I answer both your questions or only one of them so far?
I'm curious to hear a little bit about what was actually discussed in the calls.
Yeah, well, we talked about several things. We talked about the protest. We talked to some of the organizers were there, and we talked about the fact that the central message was that the protesters wanted to keep the crystal clear message of a desire for justice and not allow that to be obscured by those who use this as an opportunity just to create mayhem and anarchy and violence. And they wanted to make sure that that was not somehow clouded over. And I think they're entitled to that, and we should strive to listen to that message and not diminish the importance of that by the fact that there's some people that use the cover of these protests to do the violence that some folks, for a whole variety of different motivations, want to do in any case. It might have nothing to do with this subject. Certainly we've seen looting, that people were not there for justice, but they had nothing to do with these organized peaceful protests. The same can be true of some folks who, sort of worship anarchy, that look at opportunities like this. So that was a central message. Don't let our anger over the violence cloud the message that we need further racial justice in our society. And I think that's an important thing. The other thing we talked about, this central idea of listening to people, not just run in with solutions that governors or legislators want to prepackage, but really engage the community in a conversation about ideas, and we're looking forward to those.
Next question comes from Essex.
Yes, Governor, two questions for you.
Essex, I'm sorry, but every time you call, it doesn't work the first time. So can you try another time?
Call back.
Can you call back another line?
Next we'll go to Drew with 5.
Good afternoon, Governor. Hope this is sounding okay.
Yeah, that's great.
So with thousands of people in the streets across the state, here in Olympia, up to Seattle and Spokane, we have not heard much concern from you regarding social distancing. A lot of folks in the state can't even go out and get a haircut right now, but you have seen the images of people out on the streets, and there's talk of tear gas, perhaps making the spread easier of COVID-19. Is there a message that you would like to send? Because we've been talking to you for the last 3 months about staying indoors and staying healthy, and obviously not everyone's doing that right now.
Well, what I would say first off, There's some First Amendment rights involved here to protest. We've generally respected that from all quarters. We had people on the Capitol who were protesting us from the right. We've had people protesting from the left, and we've generally recognized that as a First Amendment right from any point of the political compass. But I will say this, I am really hopeful that people who are involved in these wear a mask, try to seek as much distance as you can. The mask really can help. I was really pleased this morning, I saw a picture of one of the protests in Seattle, about 90% of the people wearing masks. That was heartening, and I just really hope people will continue to do that to try to reduce the rates of transmission. I am heartened that we have had a decrease in the Washingtonians we're losing on a daily basis, but every one is too many, every one is a tragedy, and as I've said and will continue to say, this remains an extremely dangerous virus. And I hope all of us look for every opportunity we can to wear these masks to try to reduce the rate of transmissions. And as simple as when we're in the grocery stores, we now are going to be able to go into our retail shops. As you know, you'll be encouraged to wear a mask because there'll be a sign there when you enter the store. And the more people who do that, the more lives we're going to save, and the more counties will be able to open. So I'm very hopeful people will remain committed both to justice in our society and survival against COVID-19. We ought to be able to do both at the same time.
Next question comes from Jim with the Spokesman Review.
Governor, some legislative leaders are saying that the state should have a special session this month to begin cutting the budget before the new fiscal year and some new programs start. As one person put it to me, $1 in savings right now could be equal $1.50 savings when we get here in June or in January. Do you agree with that analysis? And also, is the state budget facing such an emergency situation that the raises for state employees should be renegotiated?
Well, I think that you can't have $1 saving until you have the votes to actually do it in the legislature, and there's no plan that anyone has espoused that I'm aware of that could have enough votes to pass the legislature right now. And this just requires more discussion amongst legislators to see what has a majorities in both chambers that I'm willing to sign to get this job done. And that just has not happened yet. There's no reason to call a special session and have folks sitting around with nothing to do because there's nothing to actually vote on. So those discussions are happening to see what's in the realm of the possible. Everything's on the table, and that, when I say everything, I mean everything. Every option is on the table at the moment. We know we're going to have over a $6 billion hole. We will know more in a few weeks, which will help us sharpen our pencils as well. So the bottom line is there has to be a plan that can actually pass the legislature that does not exist yet, and we're going to keep those discussions going.
Next question comes from Jason with KGTH.
Hey, Governor, thank you for speaking to the sort of difficult nature of policing when some of these bad actors are throwing the rocks and the bottles. There's some lawmakers in Seattle that are claiming cops are instigating the violence. Shama Sawan, socialist Seattle councilwoman, claimed this morning that people are, quote, the cops are prepared with instructions to orchestrate violence. Tammy Morales said we shouldn't tell people that looting doesn't work. So what impact does language like that have on the unrest that we're experiencing? And what can be done either from your office or from other leaders to sort of push back against some of those narratives that are probably making things worse?
You know, what I think is maybe some of the wisest counsel that I try to follow, and I hope everybody does it, this just can't, we're not going to succeed in bringing more justice and peace to our society if everybody gets into their trenches and their bunkers. And people think of this as kind of a team sport where there's two teams in opposition. That's just not going to be productive here. What I hope is that everyone will look for a way to be able to have a very strong expression of a legitimate and necessary effort to bring more racial justice to our society and reduce this unnecessary police violence. And at the same time, protect that ability and not allow the people who do want to bring violence to endanger person or property. And I just think the more that we look at this as a mutual goal than sort of a, you know, an antithesis, as, you know, the nature of your question is you're either for or against. I just don't look like this. I know a lot of police officers certainly want to go home, not get hurt, and they don't want anybody to get hurt. And I know a lot of protesters who respect people who are trying to keep them peaceful too. So I just think looking at it better through the lens of trying to be effective in protecting people is the best approach.
Next question comes from Jim with the News Tribune.
Governor, you opened up by referring to the death of Manuel Ellis in Tacoma on March 3. Do you have a perspective on whether the officers should be charged in that incident? And also, what would your message be to people in Tacoma and throughout the state who are going to look at the similarities between his death and George Floyd?
Well, the only thing I know about the incident right now is basically what I just talked about, that an individual died while under restraint of the Tacoma Police Department. That's all I know. That in itself demands a complete investigation. That in itself demands any appropriate criminal law or sanction that is appropriate. I can't render judgment on that right now because I know virtually I just shared with you all that I know. So I know enough to know there has to be a very thorough investigation. That investigation should lead wherever the evidence goes, and people need to make appropriate decisions, and that could include criminal prosecutions. So that's as much as I can share with you right now. As far as how people respond to this, I will look forward. I've not spoken to the mayor yet. I don't have any background information. I'll be very interested in what she has to say. But in any regard, we know that this will cause enormous concern, anger, and frustration at the very moment when our community is crying out for racial justice. To have an incident like this is going to cause people a very strong response. That's human. That's natural. And we ought to expect it and understand it. My hope is that we can find a way to focus our energies on something that will be productive, that will bring more racial justice, that will bring accountability to people who have mistreated citizens in law enforcement, and that will make sure that we do all the other things we have to do to bring more equity to our society in education, economics, healthcare, and everything else. And when people decide how they're going to act tonight in the next few days, I just hope they keep their eyes on the prize. And during, I'm a child of the 60s and the civil rights movement, and that was the language: keep your eyes on the prize. Figure out what's really going to move the needle in racial justice. And sometimes that's really, really hard. I know Martin Luther King had some really, really difficult discussions with his community about doing things that actually work and keeping their eyes elevated to what they want to achieve. And I guess if we can channel his spirit the next few hours and days, that'd probably be a good thing.
We're going to go back and try Essex from Cairo again.
Yes, Governor, you're doing better now.
I'm afraid not, Essex. I'm really sorry. You're kind of snake bit.
Have him send Emily the question.
Could you send Emily the question and she'll ask it?
I have the question.
Oh, we have the question.
Why don't you ask the question?
We have the question.
Okay. The question is, like Mayor Durkin, will you also meet with thousands of demonstrators? We already passed a de-escalation initiative, yet the situation in Tacoma still happened. What more needs to be done to prevent future situations and to hold the officers involved accountable?
Well, what we need to do is first off follow the initiative, make sure it's applied. We need to make sure it's not just a paper tiger, that it's actually applied. And voters voted overwhelmingly for Initiative 940, and that requires a very thorough and independent investigation of every one of these incidents. And then criminal charges as appropriate, where they're appropriate, need to be filed. And it's a matter of actually doing it rather than just saying it. In Tacoma, I believe there will be the most thorough investigation. As I said, it will lead to whatever conclusion is the just conclusion. So we can't just say, well, we passed the initiative, we're done. We actually have to effectuate it. And that'll be, we're going to insist that that happen in the days and weeks to come. As for what needs to be more to be done, there is so much that needs to be done, basically to eliminate the stain of racism in our communities and in our hearts. And that's a big job that all of us, I hope, will be involved in. And it's a job for a good dose of humility, trying to find out how we achieve that end. And I'm looking forward to anyone's ideas, including the people in these peaceful protests. As I indicated, I'm talking this afternoon with some of the folks, and I know I'll have more discussions in the days and weeks to come.
Next question comes from Austin with Northwest New York.
Hi, Governor. Just following up on Drew's question, just about trying to reconcile the protests with the current state of COVID in our state. I noted that when the rally happened or the protest happened at the Capitol several weeks ago against your stay-home order, your statement at the time was, I encourage everyone in our state to stay home and stay healthy. And if you need to go out, practice adequate physical distancing. And then in your statement this weekend, you said, I fully support the right to free speech and peaceful assembly. If you choose to protest today, be safe and peaceful. How do you reconcile, on the one hand, a couple months ago saying, please stay home, to now saying, I fully support the right to peacefully assemble in light of the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, your state government took the same approach to both protests. Each was allowed to occur. There was no law enforcement action trying to reduce the peaceful protest. Both of them were allowed to happen, and both of them did happen. So the state government didn't treat them any way differently from this situation. And I wish I could say that everybody could find 6 feet apart. Not all of them did in either context. And I hope everybody wears masks, no matter what partisan divide or ideological divide you fall on. So I think we have treated these equally, and I hope that there's nonviolent in any and all of these.
Next question comes from.
Did Austin ask me 2 questions? Did I miss one?
No, just that.
Okay, thank you.
Next question comes from Jerry with the Everett Herald.
Governor, on Monday, I asked about your reaction to the individuals who came to the streets of downtown Snohomish with guns to protect against what they thought were going to be a group of folks who might loot and damage businesses. I asked if you'd encourage or discourage, and you said at the time that your response then was that police officers are the ones trained to keep you safe, and didn't take a stance on their actions. But if you knew those individuals were predominantly black instead of white, and would you have told them to trust the police because they are trained to keep you safe?
I'm not sure if I follow your question. If who was black, I'm sorry. I don't recall your question.
I think I'm just wondering, the individuals who took part and have come out to the streets of Snohomish the last couple of days have been predominantly white, and they've been in front of the businesses protecting against damage. And you told them to trust the police to keep them safe and to keep civil control. I'm wondering if you knew if they had in fact been black, and if the businesses they were protecting were owned by blacks, if you would have directed them to let police take care of things.
I would give the same answer. Look, having more guns in a volatile situation just causes concern. The Snohomish County Sheriff, with whom I have had some significant disagreements with, as you know, I heard him on the radio, I think this morning, saying, look, call us if you got a problem. Don't cause additional risk with more firearms.
Next question comes from Hannah, Power Radio.
Hi, Governor. Just a couple of quick ones, mostly relating to I-940. I'm curious if the de-escalation that you're seeing right now with the protest is the de-escalation you would have expected with I-940 when it passed. And also, in passing I-940 and getting that done, it took years. It was a big effort of building community trust with law enforcement. Are you concerned that what we're seeing right now is going to undo all of that? And lastly, do you support the use of tear gas and flashbangs in these protests?
These are law enforcement decisions. I can't make individual decisions about the specific mechanism of keeping people safe. There's 10,000 different scenarios. There may be some situations where it is entirely inappropriate to use those tools. There may be some situations it's appropriate. And I'm not going to try to articulate the 10,000 criteria that ought to be used. I certainly encourage every law enforcement agency to use the minimal level that creates the minimal level of risk to citizens in any protest context. Obviously, we ought to be aiming for that. And I encourage any law enforcement community to think twice about whatever mechanism they use that creates risk to individuals. And they ought to have that sort of think twice before it happens attitude. That's what I would suggest. The issue of trust in these, yes, it is a concern, obviously, when there's any violence like this can rupture that sense of trust. And that's why we need to work so hard to maintain it and establish it. And that's why we have been, and I'm glad that we have Initiative 940 and independent investigations. One of the things in 940 that I think we should appreciate is that it requires an independent investigation. So this situation in Tacoma will have to be investigated by an independent agency to make sure that it's not tainted in some way. And that's really, really important. I don't think we should minimize the importance of having a strong criminal law enforcement, including on police misbehavior. We have that, and it will be used as appropriate whenever there is a violation of the law of a citizen's rights. Fortunately, we have that. I wish I could tell you that that's going to eliminate all causes of human failure. I really do. It won't. But it can be a strong measure to make sure that everyone abides by the law, including law enforcement. We insist on that. And I believe that's going to be followed here in this case in Tacoma.
Last question. Final question from the case will come aboard.
Just a clarification, did you say you were going to be meeting with the protesters? When and where is that going to happen? And the second question has to do with phase related. King County is applying 1.5, but they say they want indoor dining at 15% and also gyms to open with one-on-one training. I know it's a two-part question, but hopefully you can get to both.
Yeah, I have not seen King County's application yet. The Department of Health is charged with the job of evaluating those. So they'll be doing that in the upcoming days. I know they're going as fast as they can because I know people are eager. But people should realize that this is not some kind of rubber stamp process. We have an obligation to keep people safe, and we intend to fulfill that obligation. So the fact that I was born in Seattle doesn't mean that we're a rubber stamp for anyone in that tremendous community, and we will make an evaluation to see if it really makes sense to do what they've requested. So hopefully we'll have further answers. As far as my meetings, I'm meeting this afternoon with several of these leaders. I'm assuming there will be others in the days to come. I don't know where the meeting is. It's probably electronic, I suspect. I suspect it'll be electronic this afternoon.
All right, any final words, Governor?
No, again, I want to thank Washingtonians through some most difficult days. I'm 69 years of age. I'm trying to remember where we've had a confluence of events that has challenged us from so many different directions for so many different reasons in my state. And it's a time where I think we have demonstrated the ability to do some really wise and prudent things by using our heads. To a large extent, we've been willing to undergo frustrations for the greater community good. And we have always been driven by a desire to have positive change. We're going through that right now regarding police violence. We need positive change. We've got to have positive change. We know that this is a springboard for a lot more of the positive change we need. And in doing so, I hope we'll be invested with the same spirit of listening to each other, being motivated by compassion rather than hatred, and understanding rather than knee-jerk reactions. And if we do that, we're going to have positive change in our community. I'm very confident of that. So in the interim, please be peaceful, demand change, and wash your hands. Thanks a lot.